Listen, I can already hear the lot of you yelling, Nick, there isn't any plot holes in Boruto, the story's not over yet, they're just unanswered questions. And you're right, technically the story isn't over, so there can't be plot holes quite yet. I can also hear the other lot of you saying,
Nick, you've been gone for 6 weeks, why are we starting this video yelling?
And I'm covering my butt. But I'm home now, and I missed you all so much. I'm not going on another vacation for at least a month. I think a month and a half. And that vacation is just the weekend, so you got me for a while. And there's probably realistically a very faithful third lot of you yelling, Nick, why are we yelling about their plot holes being in Boruto, who simply clicked when they saw I posted a video and didn't even read the title? And to that third lot of you, I love you. Thank you. Mwah. Because today, ladies and gentlemen, I need to have a conversation with you. And that conversation is that Boruto might have plot holes. However, as we've already identified in this video, Boruto's story is not yet over, and therefore labeling something a plot hole isn't entirely accurate. You see, because while you can point at something and say, that's an unanswered question, that question can still be answered down the line. And therefore, any unanswered question that somebody looks at in Boruto and calls a plot hole is just that, an unanswered question. However, that's not to say that we know that question is going to be answered. See, because while yes, there is opportunity for these large, lingering questions to be answered, that doesn't mean Kishimoto's gonna do it. So are the large, lingering questions we're gonna be talking about today in Boruto plot holes? No. But do they have the potential to become plot holes? Yes. But just like every other time we make a video talking about the plot holes in certain stories, today we're also going to be doing our best to provide possible explanations for these plot holes and giving the best fan-made explanations for these plot holes. That is to say that we're going to be using our noggins and trying to explain these lingering questions away with in-universe information. And if the in-universe information we have isn't enough to explain away these questions, then we'll go with the fan-formulated theories. So is me putting the word plot holes in the title a little clickbaity scheme to get you here? Yes. But are you here? Also yes, and that's why I get to sit in this chair. But now that I've covered myself from the onslaught of scathing comments, what are these plot holes that exist within Boruto? Are there as many as Naruto? Do they distract the reader and slow down the experience? No. Actually, Boruto, relative to Naruto, is running a pretty clean ship. But that doesn't mean that there isn't some large and lingering questions in Boruto that may never be answered. And today, we're going to be talking about a couple of those. But before we get to talking about anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you love me breaking down large existential questions that exist within your favorite anime and manga, then you're gonna love my other channel, The Weeb Commander, where instead of talking about Naruto and Boruto, I talk all other anime. Or if you just love the idea of me getting existential about anime, then you're gonna love my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime and manga this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And considering the fact that I've been gone for the last 5 or so weeks, there's gonna be a lot that we're gonna need to break down in these upcoming episodes. But it was worth it. I went to China for Lunar New Year. I got a big old calf tattoo of Saber. Cody, blur out my feet. And if you want to see that entire 6-week vacation documented, go ahead and follow my girlfriend on TikTok because she recorded it and I didn't. That's Days with Door over on TikTok and Instagram. But before we get into all that, today we got to talk about one of our favorite recurring sponsors of the page, Raycon. Listen, I know. You've heard all about Raycon on every page on YouTube. That's because Raycon's everyday earbuds look, sound, and feel better than they ever have before. And in this small of a package, you're getting 8 hours of playtime and 32 hours of battery life from the charging case, all at half the price of the competitors. You can get 2 pairs of these for the price of any competitor out there. The everydays have stereo sound and passive noise isolation, which allows you to enjoy your videos and music with stereo sound enhancement, which leaves just you and your music. You see, because Raycon products block out background noise like no other, making it easier to focus on your work, your hobbies, or your workouts. But while Raycon does offer noise isolation modes, they also offer awareness modes, which allow you to do things like hold a conversation while listening to music. Keep an ear out for your kids running around the house while listening to Otaku's Anonymous. But regardless of whether or not you're going for noise isolation or awareness, you'll never have to worry about these earbuds breaking on you, as these are built to withstand a whole lot, as they're both sweat and water resistant. And trust me when I say that sweat resistance is a massive factor in why I love these so much, because when I work out, I get quite sweaty. But as you can see, not only are they incredibly resistant, but they're also incredibly sleek, and they stick in your ear like no other competitor ever could hope to. So what are you guys waiting for? If you're crushing in the gym like me while listening to Otaku's Anonymous, there's no better option than the everyday earbuds from Raycon. So click the link in the description box below or go to buyraycon.com/nchammer23 to get 20% off your Raycon purchase today, plus free shipping. So, plot holes, lingering questions, existential crises. What are we going to call the things we're talking about today? Well, I'm going to call them plot holes because I've already covered myself and acknowledged the fact that they're not actually plot holes, but I'm not going to call them lingering questions because it just doesn't flow off the tongue as well. Now, I could rank and explain all the plot holes coming out of Boruto. That kind of boils down to personal expression and how much I believe these plot holes hinder the story. And since I have an explanation for how all of these plot holes could either have been explained in the past or in the future, it's kind of hard for me to weigh them against each other. So, like I say so often, there's really no good way to start this video. So I'm just gonna start talking and you're gonna listen, because the first plot hole that we're gonna talk about today, and in fact pretty much all the plot holes that we're gonna talk about today, revolve around Ishiki. Now, ironically, all three of these plot holes revolve around different versions of Ishiki, but Ishiki, like every other Otsutsuki basically in existence, is shrouded in mystery, and therefore his very existence in the story is gonna raise a couple of question marks that never go away. And therefore, the first plot hole we're going to be talking about today is less about Ishiki and more about Jigen. See, the entirety of history surrounding around Jigen has always been a bit weird and a bit contentious. See, because we fully know that Ishiki and Kaguya descended down to Earth together over 2,000 years ago. And we know that Kaguya was supposed to be fed to the Ten Tails to create a chakra fruit, as she was the lower ranking Otsutsuki in that pair. But either because she was done with being chewed up by Ten Tails or because she wanted the chakra fruit for herself, Kaguya jumps Ishiki and tears him in half. And therefore, Ishiki floats himself over to the ear of a monk, Jigen, and inserts himself in Jigen's brain. Jigen then goes on to live for 2,000 plus years. And before you get your Twitter fingers out and start typing out comments about how it's been explained that Jigen has been alive for 2,000 years, that's not the plot hole we're going to talk about. Because yes, it was explained how Jigen remained alive for 2,000 years. See, because even though Jigen and Ishiki were an incompatible match, Otsutsukis are immortal, and since Ishiki was piloting Jigen's body and siphoning chakra from the juvenile Ten Tails they had in the Kara dimension, Ishiki was able to continue Jigen's natural life well beyond what it should have been. That doesn't answer the question of why Jigen was completely uninvolved in the entirety of Naruto's history until Boruto. See, we can explain rather easily how Jigen remained alive for the 2,000 plus years that he was alive. And we know that Ishiki and Kaguya descended to Earth, and that Jigen was originally a human, which tells us unequivocally that Ishiki started on Earth, which means that Ishiki stood as good a chance as anybody of spending those next 2,000 plus years on Earth. And yet, during the Warring States period, the foundation of the ninja clans, the first, second, third, and fourth great ninja wars, Jigen did nothing. He was completely uninvolved in Naruto's history. So, what was he doing? Well, the conventional answer here is usually that Jigen didn't have enough power to inflict any kind of change on Naruto's history until Boruto's timeline. But that's not even necessarily true, because he's been laying the groundwork for Kara for at least 12 years in part 1. It'd be closer to 15, 16 years in part 2, which means that only 3 to 4 years after the conclusion of the Fourth Great Shinobi World's War, he was already building Kara, his own Akatsuki ripoff, which I know to a lot of you still falls in line with the ideology that he didn't have enough power until Boruto's timeline. But why would that be the case? See, Jigen's been alive for 2,000 plus years. Why would he only find power in the last 15? And the reason that I'm saying that Jigen's been laying the groundwork for Kara for at least 12 years by the time of part 1 is because Jigen is heavily involved in all of the cloning / cyborg experiments that Amado undergoes, like the creation of Kashin Koji or the cyborgification of Daemon and Ada. We know that Ada is 16 in part 1. We don't know how old Daemon is. Now, we don't necessarily know at what age Ada was cyborgified, but we do know that her Senrigan ability allows her to see all the way back to her birth. And we do know that Amado's daughter died 12 years before part 1, which Boruto kind of nudgingly says to the audience, that's around when I was born. And since it's safe to assume that Amado started his cyborg experiments around when his daughter died, this would mean tangentially that Amado is probably working for Ishiki at least 12 years ago. But once again, that's within Boruto's timeline. So what point are we trying to make here? Well, the real question here is what changed in Boruto's timeline that allowed for Jigen to move freely and with power? Why did he decide 12 to 16 years ago was finally his opportunity to show his hand? can. And as it currently stands, we just don't know. See, while it is technically a possibility that for the last 2,000 plus years, minus the 15 or so he's been active building Kara, that Ishiki just wasn't privy to the geopolitics of Earth because he was in the Kara dimension, Ishiki, and therefore Jigen, has always had the ability to travel between dimensions. In fact, every Otsutsuki has the ability to travel between dimensions. It's a base ability for Otsutsukis. It's called Yamatsu Hirasaka, and it's what Kaguya uses to phase through dimensions. Now, admittedly, Yamatsu Hirasaka does require a massive amount of chakra. Even Kaguya says that. And therefore, one could technically make the argument that Jigen/Ishiki didn't have enough chakra in his Jigen form to use this ability. I believe that Jigen's battles against Naruto and Sasuke proved that he's got plenty of chakra. And while yes, technically Jigen was siphoning off chakra from the juvenile Ten Tails prior to these battles, the point that I'm driving at here is we don't know how long he's had this juvenile Ten Tails, because we don't really know how long a Ten Tail lives. But if Jigen's had this seemingly infinite source of power in his possession for anything longer than 15 years, why did he not use it to interfere with Naruto's history? Because here's the thing, if anybody had motivation to mess with Naruto's history, it was Jigen. See, Jigen presumably wants revenge against Kaguya. I mean, that just makes sense. So did he not identify in those 2,000 plus years that Black Zetsu, who was very publicly moving around, at least to the observation of an Otsutsuki level threat, was the will of Kaguya? I mean, it's been pretty vastly agreed upon by both the Boruto and Naruto fandoms that Black Zetsu was Kaguya's karma marking. And Ishiki is about as knowledgeable about karma markings as literally anybody in the universe. So did he not know what was happening on Earth? When Kaguya was released from the moon, did he react too slowly? Or was he genuinely trapped inside of the Kara dimension because of the weakness of his body? And honestly, when it comes down to possible plot holes in Boruto, I find this one the most inexcusable, because explaining away the possible answer to this question could have been done in a matter of panels, and it would put this entire rhetoric to bed. But what do I mean by that? Well, explaining why Ishiki wasn't around in Naruto is as easy as using any of the excuses I've already piled up. Kishimoto could have gone with the line that Ishiki had enough power as Jigen to warp to the Kara dimension, but was stuck there after until he was able to find an additional power source in the form of the juvenile Ten Tails. Kishimoto could say that Ishiki was so focused on the idea of taking over Earth and turning it into a chakra fruit that he had to collect power off planet for thousands of years to make his plan work finally. And therefore, while he was popping between dimensions to try to find a juvenile Ten Tails in the body of Shibai, that he lost track of what was going on Earth. And this journey and process of collecting all these powers took him thousands of years. And those thousands of years of collecting powers that would extend his life and make him powerful enough to be able to turn Earth into a chakra fruit just stopped 15, 16 years ago, when he finally was able to gather enough power to make what he wanted to happen. However, the third and easiest to swallow explanation that I think Kishimoto could have used to explain away this possible plot hole is that Ishiki knew what Kaguya was planning, and Ishiki wanted to let Kaguya/Black Zetsu do all of the hard work just to swoop in at the last second and take the chakra fruit like Kaguya had done to him thousands of years ago. And narratively, that would make a lot of sense. Ishiki has to spend a couple hundred years regaining his strength, and in those hundreds of years, he sees what Kaguya is scheming, and therefore, he allows Kaguya to flesh out her plans so that when he's back to his strongest, he can step in, kill her, and take the chakra fruit. However, because Kaguya's plan was uprooted within hours of it finally hitting fruition, all puns intended, Ishiki wasn't able to sweep in and grab the chakra fruit. And maybe the presence of Hagoromo, Naruto, Sasuke, and the rest of the Shinobi Alliance deterred Ishiki from making a move that might have turned out to be deadly, as there's a possibility that at this point he didn't have the juvenile Ten Tails to power himself up, and therefore a battle against Sage of Six Paths amped Sasuke and Naruto at the end of the Fourth Great Shinobi World War wouldn't have gone so well for him. Any of those explanations that would have taken a grand total of 2 pages to explain would work to explain why Ishiki hasn't been around for the last 2,000 years. So why hasn't Masashi Kishimoto done that yet? Well, possibly because the answer might be a bit more complicated than any of those answers. See, while any of those answers would have worked, all of them would have been given to us earlier in the story as a way to make sure that people like me don't point at the story and go, plot hole! But what if the real reason that Ishiki didn't interfere with Naruto's history is because of a plot point we haven't gotten yet? See, there are a lot of question marks surrounding both Ishiki and Kaguya. See, because, well, yes, any of the answers I just provided could explain why Ishiki hasn't been around for the last 2,000 years. I believe the real answer lies with Shibai. and possibly Amado. See, let's not forget that roughly in the area of 16 years ago, Ishiki/Jigen got his hands on Shibai's body. Probably. We know that Amado had Shibai's body, and it's more likely than not that Ishiki gave it to him than any other possible explanation. We can also assume that around the time that Amado was given Shibai's body is when Amado's daughter died. So what does any of this mean? Well, there's a relatively popular theory circulating amongst the Boruto fans that the death of Amado's daughter is actually just Shibai's ascension. And therefore, instead of Amado trying to bring back his dead daughter, he's actually just trying to bring back Shibai. But I don't want to talk about that theory right now. There's a lot of tangents, a lot of explaining to do, and it requires its own video. What I do want to talk about is one part of that theory, and that is that Shibai ascended from his physical body roughly around the end of the Fourth Great Shinobi World War, which leads people to believe that it was either the presence of Amado or Shibai, who some believe are an Otsutsuki pair duo, that stopped Ishiki from moving against Earth for 2,000 years. And therefore, Ishiki wasn't able to move against Earth until Shibai's ascendance, which could possibly have something to do with the Car Dimension planet being so barren. But as it currently stands, I do believe the best explanation to the answer of why didn't Ishiki move against Earth is because he was letting Kaguya do all the work with hopes of sweeping in at the last second and enacting his revenge. And he knew that he wouldn't be able to free Kaguya from the moon and enact revenge unless a Rinnegan was awoken. And therefore, we would have seen Ishiki in Naruto if Kaguya was ever actually successful in the creation of a chakra fruit. But since she wasn't, because she was foiled by Naruto and Sasuke, he didn't make his move. But still, as it currently stands, this is kind of a plot hole. One that I do believe will be answered later on in the story, but I just don't know enough about Amado and Shibai and their possible relationship to formulate anything now. Now, the second plot hole we're going to be talking about today also revolves around Ishiki, but specifically Ishiki and Kaguya, and more importantly, their possession of two Ten-Tails, one of which is younger than the other. See, we've made videos, a couple actually, trying to tie the canon information of both Naruto and Boruto together as it pertains to the creation of divine trees and chakra fruits and Ten-Tails. And basically, what you get when you try to do that is that Kaguya and Ishiki came to Earth together, presumably because Shibai's body was there. And they wanted to make a chakra fruit out of Earth because Shibai's body was there, because a chakra fruit sucks up all of the matter, be it living or dead, on the planet it's created on, and thus the Otsutsuki who would consume this fruit would receive all of Shibai's power, which is kind of a big deal. And therefore, along with Kaguya and Ishiki came a Ten-Tails, because they needed a Ten-Tails to create a divine trait. However, before Kaguya could be fed to said Ten-Tails, she rebelled against Ishiki and tore him in half and fed his legs to the Ten-Tails, creating a divine tree, but an incomplete one. See, because the entirety of an Otsutsuki needs to be fed to a divine tree in order for it to create a chakra fruit that presumably sucks up all of the matter on the planet it's being created on. This is why the divine tree that we see in Naruto that apparently draws Kaguya to Earth isn't as big and robust and tall and phallic as the one that was built in the Fourth Great Shinobi World War. However, Kaguya still consumes this fruit, and it's insanely powerful. So powerful it gives her a Rinne Sharingan. And just with the power of that one, presumably incomplete chakra fruit, Kaguya ascends to the level of presumably Toneri and Momoshiki and maybe even possibly Ishiki. However, because this divine tree was created using only half of an Otsutsuki, Earth continued living. And because Earth continued living, Kaguya stayed there to build an army of white Zetsu to battle against the Otsutsuki who would come for her head. And she lied to her children and the rest of humanity about how her and Ishiki descended down to Earth, presumably to paint herself as a hero to try and get Earth to battle against the Otsutsuki threat on her side, which makes sense when you consider the fact that she ruled as the Moon Princess of Earth for a little while. Now, is this a perfect explanation? No. Is it the best we can do? Yes. But even with that explanation, we have no explanation for why there's two Ten-Tails. And those two Ten-Tails would be the Ten-Tails that turned into the Nine-Tailed Beasts and the juvenile one at the Car Dimension. And thus, as it currently stands, the existence of two Ten-Tails is kind of a plot hole, but there is three possible explanations. So the first explanation is that somehow Jigen/Ishiki was able to acquire a juvenile Ten-Tails in the thousands of years that they were doing God knows what. Now, how would he go about accomplishing this? We don't really know. I mean, like we stated earlier, all Otsutsukis have the ability to travel between dimensions. So there is a possibility that while traveling through dimensions, that Jigen could have stumbled upon a juvenile Ten-Tails that he then brought back to the Car Dimension. There's also the possibility that Jigen knew how to get back to the Ten-Tails breeding camp that presumably the Otsutskis run. Because when you consider the fact that Momoshiki has needed at least 12 Ten-Tails to consume planets that he's turned into chakra fruits, you would assume that the Otsutsuki have some kind of breeding farm going on. The second possibility is that Amado was somehow able to create another Ten Tails, either presumably from one of the clones of the original Ten Tails that maybe didn't get killed in the Fourth Great Shinobi World War, or possibly from the chakra of one of the other tailed beasts, which are, as we all remember, a part of the Ten Tails. And Amado, being the creator of this new juvenile Ten Tails, would explain its childness, as it really would have only been created a max of 16 years ago in part 2. The creation of this Ten Tails at the hand of Amado would also explain why Ishiki didn't make moves until Boruto's timeline, as without the siphon of power from this now juvenile Ten Tails, Ishiki wouldn't have been powerful enough to inflict his will upon Earth. And while the second possibility to me is the most likely one, the third possibility I genuinely believe is the most fun. There's also technically the possibility that the Car Dimension world was once a vibrant and bustling world, which was turned barren through the creation of a chakra fruit. And then the Ten Tails that created that chakra fruit turned back into a Ten Tails from a divine tree after its chakra fruit was plucked, and it was left in the Kara dimension. And this seems to be standard operating procedure for Otsutsukis, at least based off everything we saw on Earth, as the divine tree that grew the chakra fruit that Kaguya plucked remained a divine tree even after Kaguya plucked the fruit. And multiple times throughout Earth's 2,000-year history, we saw the Ten Tails that later became the Nine-Tailed Beasts switch from being Kaguya to the Ten Tails to the Nine-Tailed Beast to the Divine Tree. So the idea of a Ten Tails reverting back into a Ten Tails from a Divine Tree after having its chakra fruit plucked isn't crazy. But once again, as it currently stands, we don't have an explanation as to why there's two Ten Tails. And out of the 3 plot holes we're going to be talking about today, this is the plot hole that I feel as though has the least likelihood of being answered, and thus the highest likelihood of actually becoming a plot hole. But enough about the Ten Tails, let's get to talking about, I guess, kind of the Ten Tails, because the last plot hole that I want to talk about is a relatively new one, which I believe will be answered soon, and therefore won't be a plot hole and is just kind of a lingering question, but we've already gone over the semantics. See, as we're all well aware, the Shinju are the next big bads in Two Blue Vortex, especially now that Kara is mostly gone, and therefore the Shinju are going to step up and fill the now somewhat vacant Akatsuki-esque role. But there is something slightly weird about the Shinju, and that is that by and large, we don't know how they were created. I mean, we have the general premise, right? Code made claw grimes from the Ten Tails, which were kind of like Ten Tails clones, but different. Code then augmented those claw grimes in such a way that hasn't yet been identified, while also making superior versions of those claw grimes that were able to manifest Rinnegan, and those claw grimes, being an extension of the Ten Tails, would bite anything or anyone they saw, in hopes that the person that they bit was an Otsutsuki and they could turn into a divine tree. Pure Titan logic from AOT. However, because of the modifications that Code made to those claw grimes, when those claw grimes bit people, they would manifest a Black Zetsu-esque will of the person that they bit. But that Black Zetsu-esque will wasn't operating with the best intentions of the person they bit in mind, like Black Zetsu. Instead, this manifested will simply kind of looks like the person they bit and has a little bit of their memories. Tie that into the fact that these now manifestations are called Shinju, have the powers of the Ten Tails, and have dual Rinnegans, and that's basically everything we know about the Shinju and how they're created. And while that's a little bit like telling somebody that 25 divided by 5 is 5, and therefore answering the question like any middle school math teacher, I'm gonna have to tell Kishimoto here to show his work, because there's definitely some big blanks and some big lingering questions in the question of where did the Shinju come from? Like presumably the fact that Sasuke was bitten by a claw grime 2 years prior to Moegi and possibly Jigen, and yet his Shinju appeared roughly around the same time as Moegi, Jigen, and Bugs. So why is that? See, of the 4 main Shinju that we know of, Moegi seems to be bitten the most recently, since we don't know when Bug was bitten and Sasuke was bitten about 2 years ago. And while it's conventionally agreed upon that the leader Shinju is Jigen, we don't really know how Jigen's Shinju came to be. There are theories, mostly articulated by me, that the juvenile Ten Tails was stolen and turned into the Jigen Shinju because Jigen had siphoned so much chakra from the Ten Tails, and in that time his chakra had become mixed with the Ten Tails and therefore could be used to make a Jigen Shinju. But that's just a theory, a well thought out, well articulated theory that you can find on this YouTube channel, but just a theory. But if all 4 of these people who were bitten by claw grimes turned into Shinju, why did they all do it at the same time? And it's hard when asking this question to not focus on Sasuke, because like I said, outside of Moegi, the only other person who we know when they were bit is Sasuke. And there's 2 whole years between Moegi and Sasuke's bites. So was the Shinjuification faster for the likes of Moegi than it was Sasuke? Is it because Sasuke was able to resist the Shinjuification stronger than anybody else because he's the strongest out of the Shinju? Well, the reason I bring that up is because that's a rhetoric that's been peddled online to answer this exact question. But I don't believe that's the answer, because Sasuke is not the leader of the Shinju, and the leader of the Shinju is possibly Jigen, a man who put Sasuke in, let's say, timeout for a little bit. So did something else happen that resulted in all the Shinju appearing at once? And does the juvenile Ten Tails have anything to do with it? And if all the Shinju who were supposed to appeared at the time the 4 main Shinju appeared, why were the other people who were bitten by Claw Grimes not turn into Shinju, like the man who saved Sarada and the other no-name ninja who were bitten in Konoha? In order to create a Shinju, did you have to be bitten by a Claw Grime who was considered superior and had Rinnegan? Or was Sasuke Shinju around before the other 3? And if so, why didn't Boruto attempt to take out Sasuke Shinju before he had backup? All of these massive lingering questions are so new that there's not really fan-formulated answers to any of them. If I had to take a crack at it, I would say that the Claw Grimes had a fermentation period, where the augmentations that were done to them weren't able to come to full fruition until a certain time. And when that fermentation period was over, the Shinju were able to be created. And that's pretty conducive with everything that we've seen from both Boruto and Two Blue Vortex. As in the early chapters of Two Blue Vortex, and by early chapters I mean first 3 or 4 chapters, Boruto was trying to stop the creation of the Shinju before it was too late. More importantly, he was trying to convince Code to reverse the augmentations he did to the Claw Grimes so that the Shinju would never be created. But unfortunately, that leaves us with even more questions than we had prior. Like, how could Code have stopped the creation of the Shinju in the first place? How did Boruto know that the Shinju were going to be created if no Shinju had been created yet? And as it currently stands, we just don't know. But more likely than not, it probably has something to do with the killing of the juvenile Ten Tails. If Code were to bring Boruto to the juvenile Ten Tails and they were able to kill it before the Shinju were born, it's a possibility that all the Ten Tails clones or the Claw Grimes would have died as well. And if all of those Claw Grimes and the trees that they had created all died simultaneously, then the Shinju wouldn't have been able to be born. But still, even knowing all that, it doesn't answer the question of why all the Shinju were born at the same time. And in fact, if you take all that information into account and understand that Boruto probably had to interact with a Shinju to understand what was coming, that would imply that a Shinju was born that Boruto interacted with before the main 4. So why did that happen? And like I said, especially with this and heavy quotations here, plot hole, all of these questions will most likely be answered. I mean, with Kishimoto's writing styles, some of these questions will probably be skipped, but most of them will eventually get answers at some point. But as it stands, these are substantial, lingering questions in the Boruto community that we have no answers for. And unfortunately, it's not entirely necessary that we get answers for them. As if Kishimoto never answered any of these questions, it wouldn't be the end of the world for Boruto. So while these may not be plot holes yet, there's sleeper picks for them. But I want to hear from you guys. For the 3 lingering questions that I have, do you have any possible answers? Is there other lingering questions that you have for Boruto that you're afraid may never be answered? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Oh, I just know there's somebody in the comments who didn't even start the video before they started typing out angry comments.